Hey guys, in this video we're going to be building a to-do list application with Firebase version 9 and Svelte 3. So, so we can see our Firebase database on the left. So what I'm going to do here is that I'm going to try to add a to-do like buy milk, and we can see it adding on the left hand side. I'm going to add another one, yeah, and we can see it added in real time. So we can click it where we can see our text. And we can also delete as well, and that's going to automatically remove it. We can also delete as well. I'm going to delete this one. And I'm also going to refresh the page, and we see that to do. So this is what we're going to be building. I hope you're going to enjoy it because you're going to learn a lot. So let's go. So quickly, before we get started coding, it's important for us to know what Firebase is and how we're going to be using it. I don't recommend skipping this portion of the video because it's also, even if you know what Firebase is, it's going to tell you how we're going to be using it exactly. So what is Firebase? It's a NoSQL database by Google, and it allows us to use a database on the web. So what the NoSQL means here essentially is that it stores data in documents and collections instead of tables and rows. So how does a document and a collection look like? So first of all, this is like a simplified diagram of it. We have a collection, and a collection has documents, and inside the document, these are JavaScript objects. JavaScript objects is how we essentially store the data. That's where the data is. So moving on, there are some important functions for us to understand. We know that a collection is a bunch of documents, and a document just has a JavaScript object. That's what the definition is, but these guys are still functions themselves when you're using the Firebase SDK, and add doc and set doc as well. So if we move on, if we were to run collection and we pass in the database config, and we're going to see this in a moment, but I'm not going to talk into it. We're going to see this in a moment. So if we pass in the database config and we pass in to do's, which is the name of that collection, so it's going to return the entire collection like this. So that's what the collection function does. But if we pass in doc, pass in the database config, we pass in to do's, and we pass in ID1, it's only going to return that document that has an ID of 1. So we're going to be using this a lot in the code. So it's very important you understand this. Okay, so let's get started building our to-do application with Svelte and Firebase version 9. So let's quickly get started with it. So I'm going to run this command from the terminal, and it's going to ask us some questions. So we're going to answer them together. Just a bunch of simple questions about how we want to set up our application essentially. So I'm going to keep dot because I'm in my current directory. Click enter, and I'm going to click on Svelte. You could set up using the Svelte kit, but we don't actually need that. Can you set up using JavaScript and clear npm install the dependencies? And by the way, you want to make sure you want to come to Firebase or google.com and make sure you have a Firebase account, which is very important for this to work. And after this has installed the dependencies, we also need to install Firebase as well. So there is a bunch of configurations that we need to do. So while this is taking some time, I'm just gonna pause the video here, and we're gonna be here, and I'll show you when it has installed. So it has installed dependencies. What I want to do now is install Firebase. So npm I Firebase. So that is going to install Firebase for us. So that's incredible. It has now installed Firebase. So I'm ready to get started with the cool and fun stuff. So before we do that, let's just start run our command. Let's just see our application so far. And I can guarantee it is not a blank project. So there are going to be some stuff that we have to clear out. So I'm just going to click on this link. That's going to open it. So you see we have a default counter application, but we don't need a default counter application. We need a to-do list application. So what we're going to do here clear everything out. So clear everything out. Don't worry, we're gonna write our own styles. So remove. We can even delete the counter.svelte if we wanted to. Yeah, we could delete that if we wanted to. So we're just gonna move this to recycling. Okay, now layout of a now we have our bare bones app. So the first thing that we need to do is that what I want to do is I want to set up Firebase first, then we'll build the to-do list application around that. So let's come to Firebase. I'm going to click go to console. As I said, if you have a Google account, you should see everything here. Just no fancy stuff. So, so I'm going to click on add project. That is what you should see. So I'm going to click on Svelte to do app. Click on continue. We don't need we don't need Google Analytics. That is kind of completely overkill for this project. We don't need that, and it's going to make our project start pretty much faster right now. So while that's setting up, let's come here. So what we're going to do is we're going to have a form. The form action is not going anywhere, but it's going to have an on submit. Sorry, I'm going to have an on submit to handle submit. Okay, then inside here is going to have an input and a button. And the button is going to have a type of submit. So as you can see, submit. And we're going to bind the value of this input, bind value to an input variable. So let's make those variables and functions accordingly. So we're going to say let input, okay, constant handle submit is going to be equal to a function like so. And the first thing that we want to do, since it's a form, is to prevent the default action of the form submitting. Default. Okay, nice. Okay, now it says our project is ready. But once you've created a new project, that's not all. You also have to add a new app. So in this case, we're going to add an app. We're going to call this Svelte to do app. And again, Firebase hosting is not still necessary. If you do want to host it, by the way, you can host it using Netlify, and that's not really hard at all. So if you guys want me to do a tutorial on that, you can. I might even host it at the ending. So we have already installed Firebase, so we're pretty much one step ahead. So we just have to just do now is just to just copy this and go to console. So what we're gonna do now is we're gonna come here. I'm gonna make a new file. I'm just gonna call this our firebase.js. So I'm gonna paste everything here. This is gonna be where we store our Firebase config. So what we're doing right now is that this is our Firebase config and we're passing through a function called initialize app. So we need to initialize other functions so that get firestore, for an example, which is the database that we're going to be using. So it's going to be from Firebase slash firestore. So we're going to say constant db is going to be equal to get firestore of app. So like this, what we just need to do is export default db, because this is the only thing that we're using here, because we're going to need the app. And of course in the app we also need to we're going to import that. So import db from firebase dot, so we're going to put dot slash firebase.js. So what we want to just do, we can just console log the value of db just to make sure that everything that we have the import and export, everything is done correctly. And by the way, these imports have to be top level. Okay, which other error does it give us? It says Firebase has no export. Did you mean to import db? Okay, sorry, like so. So let's check this out in the browser. Okay, so apparently we have an error. We're supposed to be binding the value to the input instead of the button. That was just a silly mistake of me. So after that, that should be gone, and we can just hit test, click on submit, and if we click on the browser, we should see that console log. If we do not see any console log, we know that there's something wrong somewhere with our initialization. Okay, so as you can see, if we click on here, we can see everything. So everything is nicely done. And one more thing is that we have to come to Firestore. So we have to come to Firestore, click on Create Database, and I promise after this, there is no initialization mode again. So click on Start in Test Mode. That is very, very important. Click on Enable. So after that, that's going to create a database application for us. So what do we want to do essentially? So what we want to do is that we want to add something to the database. So first of all, first and foremost, this is going to be an async function because we're going to need it. So the way we add things in Firebase is that we use a function called add doc. And if you go to the docs, you're going to see add doc and set doc. Add doc adds a document to the database without generating an ID. So I'm going to demo that. We're going to say add doc. And by the way, this is asynchronous, so we have to use await. Then we have to pass in a collection. Okay, then inside here, we can just call our collection. First of all, actually, we pass in a DB, and we call our collection to dos. Then we'll pass in the actual data that we want to pass in here. Then what we want to do is I want to also import, you see, as already imported add doc, we want to import collection as well in case you don't get that imported. Just quickly import it there. So we're passing in the DB here, and we're passing the collection, which is the to do collection. And the next thing that we need to pass in is the actual to do. So we're going to say to do text. It's going to be whatever is inside that input, and we can just pass in an ID. And the ID is going to be crypto. So this is how you generate a secure ID in the browser. Get random. This is going to pass in to do text as the input as what we type, and the ID is going to be a random ID generated through this function. And if there are no errors, it should create our document for us. So if we come here, put this side by side, we type something, and see if we come back here, we can see that it has already created our database here. So we can just come here and add in test to do list. Click on enter. Oh, sorry, we removed our event e.prevent default. So save that, and if we try this again, so this time the form doesn't submit. We don't see any errors in the console. Let's refresh here and see if we see that collection, that document inside our collection of to-dos. So give it a second. So to do's, the reason why we have to refresh is that if the collection has never been created before, we won't see it. So it has created our collection here. We can see the document ID, and we can see the actual ID from our function, and we can see the to do text, which is test. And if we come here, we can see that it's test that is here. So what we want to do is that we want to get this and we want to display this here. And we also want to also get that to do when we refresh the page. So the way we do that, the way we solve those two problems is by using an onMount and a snapshot listener. So in Svelte, there's a function called onMount that runs when the component enters the DOM. So this is going to run when the component enters the DOM. And this is going to be very helpful for us. We're going to use the snapshot listener to then listen for changes, then append it to the DOM in case there were changes to the collection. So what we're going to do here is I want to attach our snapshot listener. So on snapshot, it's a function. Then we're going to pass in db, then to do's. So this is essentially a reference to where we want it to be. Actually, correction should be two L's. We put in a comma, then this returns us the data as a snapshot. So like so. So what we're doing here is our passing in, we're telling this exactly where to get the document from. Just like what we're doing here, but what we're doing, we're telling it where to add the document. And this snapshot is the data that it returns back to us. So what we're going to do here is we're going to say snap. Then what we're going to say is a snap is going to be equal to snapshot.docs. The reason why we're creating a global variable out is because this value, we need this value later on to render it down here. And we cannot just render it here because this snapshot is scoped to a function. So what we want to do is I want to check first if snap, as in if there is a value in snap, what do we want to render? So this is going to be inside a UL. And we're going to render this inside an LI. Then before we render it in an LI, we also have to loop through everything because there might be more than one in our case, but we have to loop through it just in case there are more than one. So we're going to say each snap as data, for an example. Then we can close our each block like that. Just like the way in React, when you're rendering data, you need to pass in an ID. When you're rendering data in Svelte, when you're rendering data, you also need to pass in an ID so that it knows when which one changes. So we'll do that in a second. So let's just see our data first. Just call this data. No, let's not call this data. We can call this a snapshot. Remember, this is not the same thing as the one up. Snapshot.data. So this is how we get the data, then to do text. Clear. So we can see that here, right? We run snapshot.data.todo-text. This snapshot.data returns the object of what we see essentially right here. I'll just pass in .todo-text here. Okay, so when I was talking about an ID later on, we can just pass in our ID as snapshot.data.id. You're not going to notice anything right away, but in case any data were to change, it will exactly know which one to render. So what we have to do now is that we also want to attach a delete to be able to delete to-dos from the front end. And by the way, this is not looking very good right now. We're going to style this, so don't worry about that. So I'm just going to put an X icon to delete. Then I'm going to attach and handle a click listener. So I'm going to call this handle click. So we're just going to pass in handle click like that. Then we're going to come here and say const handle click. And I'm going to pass it as a function like so. So now that we've created our function handle click, okay, so what do we want to do here? So what we want to do is that for us to be able to delete it, we have to pass in like a property that we are going to be able to track exactly where the item that needs to be deleted. So we're going to pass in the ID like so. So we're going to pass in snapshot dot data dot ID. So instead of taking the event object, we now have access to the ID. And remember when I talked about add doc and set doc earlier? Well, add doc generates a random ID, but setdoc doesn't generate a random ID. It allows us to control the ID, and this could be useful for deleting it. So what we might want to do is that we might want to change this to setdoc in the future. So let's try to do our delete function first. So we're going to say await delete doc. As usual, we want to pass in the collection. So the first thing that we pass in our DB configuration, then we pass in to do's. But we have an error here. And if we read this error, it says it must be a root. It must refer to the absolute path. This is referring to a collection, and it's not possible for you to delete a collection from the front end. So what we have to do is that we have to make sure that the ID, this ID, and the ID of the document are the same thing. So let me show you what that means. This ID and this ID have to be the same thing. And to do that, we have to use setdoc. Setdoc is going to be collection. We're going to import that. We're going to change it to setdoc instead of adddoc. And setdoc, instead of using collection, we're not going to use a different function called doc. As well, we're going to import that from here as well too. So the difference between doc and collection is that doc is to a document path. So we're specifying, we're adding a new document with an ID. We're specifying the ID of it. Collection will just add a new document without an ID. So we pass in the collection. Now we have control over the ID. So the ID can just be this thing right here, but we want it to be the same thing. So we just generate it here. Constant ID X this. So we're going to set the ID to be equal to this. We're going to pass in that same ID here, and we're going to pass in that same ID here. So it's the same thing. We can just write it like this. So we pass in that same ID here, and now what we can do is that deleting it now is not going to be very easy because we're just passing the ID. So let's just recap and backtrack for a minute so that we understand exactly what is happening here. So from top to bottom, when the component mounts, we get the function using an snapshot function. The snapshot function takes a collection which is a bunch of documents, and documents are a bunch of JavaScript objects. So the collection, then we pass in the DB parameter, passing DB, and DB is like a configuration for the Firebase SDK, Firebase Firestore, which is the database that we're using. We pass in the collection name I want to get the data from, then it gives us the collection back. Then we set this equal to a global variable. Okay, good. So and handle submit, what handle submit does is that it prevents the default action, it generates an ID. We set that ID to the document that we're making inside the collection, inside the collection, inside the collection name to do's. Use the setDoc function. This is asynchronous, so we use the await. And we pass in the data to do text as input and the ID. And the handle click is essentially to delete the document. We pass in await, asynchronous again, delete doc, and we pass in where we want to delete that doc, which is the DB to do's and the ID that is being passed in here. So save. So let's add one test 2. You see test 2 is going to add, and the ID here and the ID here they match. So deleting it is going to be a piece of cake. So that has been deleted. So at this point, we have literally just made a to-do list application with Svelte and Firebase CRUD. So it's great and all, but we need to style it to make it look good. So styling takes a bunch of time, in my opinion, takes a lot of time. And these guys, they have their own default styling. So the first thing I want to do, the app.css, I want to remove that. Save. So this is what we got by default. We might also want to remove this as well. So everything is inside the main tag, so we can just give them. This is not a CSS tutorial, by the way, but you're gonna learn CSS anyway. So we're just giving it a display of flex, align items of center. This is just basic normal stuff to center it. And we might want to give everything box sizing border box, just so that we don't have any weird behavior with margin. So this is very important when you're styling inputs. And by the way, we need to have a h1 just so that we know what we're doing here. H1 to do app save. And by the way, we want to give everything a flex direction of colon. Nice. So what we want to do is I want to style the input, and I don't quite like this white background. So body, I'm going to give the body a background color of light blue. I'm going to give the input a padding of 10 pixels, 15 pixels, 15 pixels. That looks way better. The button, I'm going to give the button a padding of 10, 15 as well. So the button is quite easy to style. What we just have to do is set this to border none, outline none. So as for the font, I'm going to use a font called Quick Sans. It's a very nice font, and it's going to bring everything to life. So Quick Sans Google font. So applying a font from Google Font is dead easy. There's nothing here. We just take the font using the URL and stuff. So we just need the 400. We're going to click on import because we want to use the CSS version of it. We don't want to apply this into our HTML. Nobody does that. So we're going to copy the style rules, give this to everything. Copy this again. Give this to everything. I want this to be important so that it overrides any other thing. So nice, you see everything looks much better. The button, by the way, we want to give it a cursor of pointer, and we want to say button colon hover. And by the way, I have a CSS 10 CSS concept to skyrocket your CSS skills in the description bar below. So you should check that out. Background black, color white. This is pretty nice. Pretty nice effect. We just swapped everything. So you should see. Okay, nice. Okay. So the input, you want to give it a font size of about 18 pixels. Okay, 15 pixels, sorry. And so what you have to just do is just style the li. So the li, I want to give it a display of flex, a width of about 400 pixels, or maybe 300 pixels. Want to give it justify content space between, maybe a background color of white. Maybe space between is not quite great, space around. So we'll give this a padding of, I'm not a CSS ninja by the way, this is just random styles. Okay, 10 pixels padding is better. Or maybe we'll make it 10 pixels, 15 pixels. So what we have to do is that we have to target that span. So span, we want to give it a background color of red and a color of white. In fact, what we're gonna do is we're gonna give this guy just very little padding. Then the span, we're gonna give the span a padding of 10 pixels. Font weight bold, or yeah, bold ourselves. We're gonna give this an align items of center. I do feel like there's something missing actually. Let's change it to space between. I think space between is a bit more better. Maybe padding 1 pixels. So this looks quite about right. Maybe we don't give it a cursor of pointer. We might remove the width. Okay, the width is very important. We can give it width 100%. Okay, 400 pixels, 300. That's okay. So padding 5 pixels. So I'm just gonna add buy milk, buy milk 2, 3. So this looks absolutely great. We can delete, and we can add more. And by this way, this test is not going to delete because the ID and this one they are not the same. So by when we're making this, we having this was before we updated the code, so we're just going to delete it. So it's not going to delete actually if we try to delete it from the content. That's not actually a bug if you try and delete it with your own. So that's going to remove because of our snapshot list now. So subscribe. That's on my to-do list. Like, and I'm not removing this. Okay. So that was a short video on how to build a to-do list and even how to style it. Thank you for watching. Please subscribe, like, and I'll catch you in the next one. I have a monstrous work of editing to do. Okay, so let's get started building our to. The good setup is as